Hello again everyone and welcome back along to the channel where we're going to have a preview of round 5 of Super Rugby. But before we get to that, we're going to have a look back at round 4 and see what happened over last weekend, and then take a look forward and see how our predictions pool and our fantasy team pool is looking. And of course, finally, the main events. We're going to take a look forward to this weekend's action from round 5 of Super Rugby, who I think is going to win the games, what my picks are, and of course, my reasons why. But before we get into any of that sort of stuff, we're going to be going right up here, Tibble Recap, and a bit of a check to see how our card count is going. Now, it's seen a lot of action this weekend, so a bit of an update up here. And we can see that we have an amazing 41 yellow cards so far in 4 rounds of competition. And after some exciting stuff in round 4 as well, we also picked up another 2 red cards. So we now have a total of 3 red cards and 41 yellows. That is 44 total cards in 4 rounds of rugby. Just insane. And as we talk about every week, we are well and truly on the way to smashing what 2016 had in terms of cards. But let's move on from that and let's take a look at what happened last weekend in round 4 of the competition. Here are the full list of results, and we're going to go through them, kicking things off at the start of the weekend on Friday night, where it was the Crusaders up against the Blues. Now this one promised quite a lot, but in the end it was the same old story we've seen from the Crusaders over the last few weeks as well. The comeback kings, that is what they're all about. They looked average. The Blues pretty much the better team for a good portion of that match, but you can always count the Crusaders in for a late comeback to steal the victory. And then this week they even had a little bit of extra time to throw a little bit of cream on top of that victory as well and put some extra smashing into the Blues. It's amazing what this Crusaders team is doing. They are the masters of the comeback, but they left it late once again. How many times can they keep it up? Final score there, 33-24, Crusaders at home picking up the win. Match number 2 of the weekend. We saw the Melbourne Rebels at home to the Chiefs. Now this one was quite interesting because the Chiefs, obviously heavy favourites to pull off a big and easy victory over the Rebels, who have been pretty average recently as well. But the game was fairly close and ended up being quite tight until, well, pretty much full time. A winning margin of only 13 points, less than convincing from the Chiefs. But they got it done in the end, and as it continues to prove, the good teams know how to win. On the road as well in Australia, the Chiefs keep up the poor Australian record with a 27-14 victory over the Melbourne Rebels. Game number 3, and we made our way over to South Africa for a rare Friday night game over there, where the Bulls, who hadn't won a match before this weekend, were up against the Sunwolves. Now most expect them to get their first win of the season here in this matchup, and that's exactly what they did. But it wasn't without the struggles that you really wouldn't expect a team like the Bulls to face against the Sunwolves. This is where we saw our first red card of the weekend, and the Bulls really, that's when their game got underway. The game was pretty close at half-time, and just after that, when they received their red card, that's when they kicked into gear, scoring 17 unanswered points to eventually canter away with this victory over the Sunwolves. 34-21 the final score, almost a losing bonus point in it for the Sunwolves if they could have scored that try that was disallowed right at the end, but still promising signs from the Japanese franchise. They just can't seem to get it done when it matters though, for those big iconic moments that they should be experiencing this season. So that was the final score there. We moved our way back to Saturday night now, where the Hurricanes were at home against the Highlanders. Now this one was pretty interesting as well, because it was expected to be a pretty close matchup between 2 decent enough New Zealand Conference sides. We saw the Hurricanes lose their first game in round number 3, and we thought, well, this could be quite an interesting fixture, but the Highlanders depleted with injury, and they did hang on for a good amount of time, but in the end, it was that amazing skill of those X-Factor players that the Hurricanes possess that just blew away what the Highlanders had in the tank. It was a bit of a thrashing, this one. It got pretty ugly towards the end, and tries were flowing thick and fast towards the end of that matchup. The final score there was 41-15. Yes, 41-15. A big win here for the Hurricanes over the Highlanders. Their season is looking a bit dodgy at the moment now, the Highlanders, and they need to start picking up the wins. We'll get to them later on in the episode. Next up, we went to Australia with the Waratahs. The woeful Waratahs were facing the Brumbies. Now, a tenacious Brumbies team. I'll talk about them in this manner quite a bit recently as well, and I did back them to get this victory because I thought the way they played, they just seemed to know how they were playing. They had a lot more structure, a lot more plan, and a lot more purpose, and knew where their strengths and weaknesses were. The Waratahs, however, don't even seem to know where they're going to be getting dinner from, let alone what's happening out in the field out there, and it continued again in round 4 as well. They just looked completely lost. The Brumbies took some time to get going, but when they did, they looked far superior in the second half. Final score there was 28-12. Brumbies destroying the Waratahs as their season is taking a real turn for the worse. Like the Highlanders, they need to pick up some wins. Following that, went to South Africa where the Lions were up against the Reds, and this is where we've seen red card number 2. It was Craig Cooper this time, who was further suspended for 3 weeks as well following this red card. The Lions really put them to the sword, absolutely thrashed them, 44-14. There's not much we can say about that. The Reds further consolidating this failure status despite all the signings. They just don't look very good at all, and the Lions have really proved it. A big win. Red cards obviously do not help, but you've got to say, given a chance, you've got to take it. And the Reds should be a good enough team to at least compete against sides from South Africa on the road. But not today, not any day at the moment, it seems, for the Reds. They went down massively to the Lions. Next game up, we were still in South Africa, and we had the Sharks at home to the Kings. Now, this one, you'd expect the Sharks to thrash the Kings, but the Sharks really did play at a very much lower level. They just couldn't seem to get going. They were dragged down into the mistake-ridden, ugly game where the Kings, play. That's the best of their ability, and they just couldn't really get going. It was a shame. The Sharks have been looking so good this season, but they're really behind the 8 ball for this one. The Kings pretty much could have won that game quite easily as well. A late penalty from Bosch, who was kicking pretty averagely throughout, many chances to score points, but they could not take them. And amazingly, this game was finished 19-17 to the Sharks. That's right, just 2 points in it, which, how did that happen? How did the Kings draw a team down so much to that level of crap? And just about pull off a victory. We'll talk more about that later on for some more depth in the Sharks. Finally, we were in Argentina. The Jaguares were up against the Cheetahs, and many expected this one to be quite a poor match here for the Cheetahs. So many injuries, so many players missing, so many struggles for a lot of teams. It's not only the Cheetahs that are missing players here, but the Jaguares, well, it's pretty much Argentina. They're not facing too many injuries at the moment. A couple of players in there, but there's such a depth in their squad that you could hardly notice. And they rotate pretty well. You'd think, if they get results a bit better and keep that rotation up, they will be extremely dangerous to have fit players throughout. Again, international break's going to be key for them. But they thrashed the Cheetahs big time, 41-14. That is a huge win. Only one team in that game, and it was the Jaguares. 2 in a row. They look really, really good, and it's good to see them back in the winning ways of Super Rugby. I'm happy for it, although I didn't pick it, which is a bit annoying, but that's fine. And that is a wrap. Of course, Western Force and the Stormers having the week off of the bye, and that leaves those 8 matches. An entertaining weekend of Super Rugby, no doubt about that. But how did your picks go? How did everyone's selections and fantasy teams go? Let's take a look at the leaderboards of the league. Okay, so we have a bit of movement at the top of the table for the Predictions League. We see Caleb42N reclaim what he had top spot. I think he actually picked up that a couple of weeks ago, but he's got the yellow cap this week. Best picks in the league gives him up 3 places to first from 3rd. That sees Timothy and the Stick move down 1 each, going to 2nd and 3rd respectively. And we have a new man, Thomas. How do we say that last name? Bashalia coming in to 4th. Massive raise up for him, up 6 positions, and he's a big riser from the weekend's action. So that is your top 4. Some big names making some big rises through here. A few up 13 and 10 places. 15 here for Assassin's Attack, except S's for X's. Who knew what that? The Scottish Cannon going all right here as well. 18th spot for him. His picks coming in quite nicely at the moment. Brett Hartley, amazingly, another name you may know off the channel. He is just rocketing up this leaderboard up to 27th now as well. And to think he missed the first round of action, yet is putting everyone else just about half the league to shame at the moment. Hopefully get him with his picks coming on this show in the next couple of weeks would be great as well. So a big rise there for Brett up the leaderboard. Further down, didn't move. My predictions kept me dead solid 38th. Didn't go anywhere, but didn't get the wooden spoon, which was nice. It was the magic gnome down the bottom in 48th, which picked up the wooden spoon. Not too many huge droppers here. 14 down for Crusaders for life. Probably that was the biggest one, but at the top it is Yellow Cap Man Caleb, 42N. Now, how does he transfer to the fantasy team? So we have a bit of movement here at the top of the fantasy team leaderboard as well. We have a new number 1, which is Enter Team Name the Captain, leading the way of 772.5 points. Sitting second is Awesome Transgender Sloths, hugely awesome name as well, up 5 spots, and the yellow cap winner for round number 4. He's got 761.5, so he's catching up on the captain in top spot, but down from first last week is Solar Eclipse's Assassin Attack. You may remember him from the one we just looked at, the Predictions League. He's doing alright here as well, 759. Going through the rest of them, Scottish Cannon making big boost up the leaderboard here. He's into 6th, a big lift of 8 places from last weekend's action. Further down, big drop here for Ben Nichols, going down to 15 places to 18th. And further on down, we have the All Flakes down 33rd. So dropping a couple more spaces here. But I seem to be chasing all the injured players at the moment, which is a bit of a shame with the injury case at the moment around Super Rugby. But that's the whole thing about fantasy team, is keeping your team fit. Further down the leaderboard, we have Wooden Spoon going to Kev45 and his Merry Dragonflies, who didn't do too well in last week's action. Just 370.5 points for his boys. But it is one man who is doing alright at the top here. Enter team name number 1. Yet again, good for him. And let's get now on to the preview of round 5. Alrighty, so action kicks off underway Friday night with our first match of round 5 being the Crusaders at home to the Western Force. Now this is going to be one of two things here. It's either going to be a really, really big win for the Crusaders, or it's going to be one of those matches we've seen from them, like they struggled against the Reds and they couldn't put them away, and then bang, late comeback like we've seen last week against the Blues as well. But although that seems to be a strength of the Crusaders at the moment, the master of the comeback kings, they're getting all the accolades. But I think people are missing the point here about the Crusaders. They're great on the comeback. Yeah, they look amazing for 10-15 minutes per match, and they're still getting the victories as well, which sure is brilliant, is great, is fantastic, is exactly what you want. But people are often missing the fact that they're really, really crap for 65 minutes. Last weekend on Twitter, a lot of people in New Zealand media and things saying that they were stopping watching the match because the Crusaders are playing so badly. Now, that come as a bit of a surprise to me, especially what happened over the last 2 weeks prior to that. But still, it tells you an indication of how badly that team was playing for a good hour or so of that match. And that's got to be a bit of a worry for Crusaders and the Crusaders fans as well, knowing that the team is performing that badly. When is it going to be until a team discovers, a way to stop them, and that bad start turns into unable to come back? And so teams are just going to start to understand how they play, and they're going to have to be a bit more clever. They're going to have to stay in the matches a bit more if they want to find a way to stay in the lead more often than not. They need better starts to the games, and that is something they need to work out. So I think the Crusaders, a lot of people saying they're the best team in the competition right now. I couldn't disagree more. In the last 10 minutes, they're by far and away the best team in the competition. But if you get a team that can really pile on the points, I'm talking about a Hurricanes, for example, over 60 minutes, that could be too big a bridge for them to come back from. And against a good defensive team, maybe the Sharks, if they're at home, something like that, could be an interesting side for the Crusaders to face when defence is really the big core of a side. Are they going to be able to strike back against that sort of thing? That's what I'm mostly concerned about the Crusaders team at the moment. They just don't know how to lose, but they need to sort out that first hour or so of their matchup. They've got a couple of reinforcements coming back this weekend. They have Matt Todd returning in the back row. They also have Digby Ioane, who has been out recently, returning to the wing. But they've also one interesting selection, as they've already named their team. So they've actually picked up Barrett, Scott Barrett, the brother of Bowden Barrett. They're actually playing him not in second row like he has for the All Blacks and, of course, the Crusaders before. They're playing him on the blind side of the back row. Interesting call, playing three specialist locks like that. But when you've got Matt Todd and you also have Jordan Taufua at 8, you know, why do you need a flanker? You just need strong runners, which is what Scott Barrett is. You've got to give him that. He's a very, very good runner of the ball. 7 and 8 also are as well. So are your 4 and 5 with Romano and Whitelock there. Oh, what a monster of a pack it is from the Crusaders. And they do look really, really dangerous as well with that All Black ridden pack against a team like the Force. And, well, the Force returning from the bye. And you got to say, if there was any Australian team that you've been impressed by, it's probably going to be the Force. No, they've done better than most people have expected. Most people thought they were going to be pretty average. They've done all right. It's better than expecting more like the Waratahs and them being utter crap. So you've got to give the props here to the Force for actually being all right. But in saying that, the Force are actually yet to face an overseas opponent, which really begs a question of really how good have they been, which is the most interesting part. Would they be all right against New Zealand sides or South African sides for that matter as well? Australian sides, probably not the best judge, but then again, you look at the others, there's not much going on there either. As for the whole Australian division as one, they've only actually beaten one overseas opponent, which is just remarkable that after all these rounds that the Australian teams have played, they've only beaten one overseas team. That is pretty poor, especially by an Australian standard. They need to improve that massively. The Force, I don't think they're going to be doing it this weekend whatsoever. Although they've looked good, you know, if the Crusaders keep up the way they've played, the Force could be winning this one after an hour, but I expect the Crusaders really need to sort this stuff out. I think they need to lead this one from go to woe right throughout and just completely dismantle this Force team. I've got the Crusaders winning this one by 17 points in my pick. I think it should be a good, easy win for the Crusaders side against the Force. Second game of the weekend, and we're over to Australia with the Rebels against the Waratahs. Now, this one is very, very interesting. Now, the Rebels had a very good 40 minutes after returning from the bye. They tested the Chiefs very, very much. Now, I didn't think they would. We've seen the Blues absolutely destroy them in round one. There wasn't really much going the way of the Rebels. They've been thumped by everyone, but then they pulled out that amazing first half. Well, no, it wasn't amazing, but it was pretty solid. They did match the Chiefs, which the way the Chiefs been playing, wet, sun, whatever weather, whatever conditions, whatever stadium, the Chiefs have been one of the best teams in the tournament so far, and the Rebels matched them blow for blow for a good 40 minutes before being blown completely away in the second half. I feel if the Rebels can keep that 40 minutes up, especially against the other Australian sides, they could be well in a chance to take some points, especially even more against the Waratahs, who have been completely hopeless against anyone. The Rebels have that ability, that potential, but they're still struggling to fulfill it. But this could be the weekend they turn that around, because they're up against the Waratahs. We've talked about them before. They look dreadful. They look horrible. They look like they're unable to break a line. They look like they're unable to score. They are unable to lead a match. They just look like they're always playing catch-up, whether they've got the ball or not got the ball, whether their score's 0-0. They seem to always be playing like they're behind, like they're desperate. They're throwing that, nothing ball that they really don't need to. They're just doing silly things, silly mistakes, silly errors, no direction, no leadership. There's a monster of stuff that you can really criticise about this Waratahs team, and you can't really argue with it because the way they've played, and when you look at that Australian table, how bad it looks. The only teams that got points against are other Australian teams, which just goes to show how bad this Australian conference could turn out to be. And then once again, we're going to be in that boat. We've got an Australian team going into the playoffs where they've got next to no points. It's going to be a repeat of that, and you can bet your bottom dollar that people will be complaining about it. What do the Waratahs have to do here? They've got to go back to basics. And it's really hard to back this team to win anything, even the toss at the start of the game. You can probably bet they're losing them as well. It just seems to be a complete shambles about this Waratahs team here. The one thing they have changed here, as the team has just come out a few hours ago, is they've put Israel Folau back at fullback now. That does interest me a bit more because I do not like Israel Folau 13. If Australia continue to play in there, well, you can just put him down the toilet as a wasted talent. He needs that counter-attack play. He needs an unstructured and broken defence to attack. Sure, he's great at attacking any line of defence, but when he's got that open line in front of him, he can see, he's got time, he's got space, he can work the defence the way he wants, not get the ball and bang, get a tackler right on him. He's a strong player, he can beat a man, and when he gets one-on-ones or two-on-ones, he can do the whole working through the defensive line. When he's in a flat back line and they're going nowhere, his pack's going nowhere, if they're going to get anything out of Folau, it needs to be on the attack. Amazingly, I'm going for the Rebels. Yeah, 4 points. Bank me up for the Rebels by 4 against the Waratahs. That's my pick. What is yours? That's what I'm wanting to know. Are you game enough to back the Rebels as well? Who knows? That could be probably a poor match, but an interesting match to watch. No doubt about that. Next up, we are off to Eden Park, where the Blues are in action against the Bulls. Now, the Bulls, a team that really doesn't like to travel, and if the Blues can recreate that first 40, 50, 60 minutes that they played against the Crusaders, they could really find themselves in a winning chance here. The Blues play their best rugby, I think, for that period of time, and if they can do that any time for the rest of the season, they'll probably beat most teams as well. Even going to sleep and completely falling off the face of the world like they did, there's probably still going to be enough to beat most normal teams. The Crusaders are not normal. We found that out as well. To keep the pace of the other New Zealand sides, no mean feat. We've seen it already. New Zealand sides are streaks ahead of especially what Australia and for what we've seen so far, some South African teams have to offer. And I think the Bulls really not up to the play this year. They've struggled. We've seen them struggle against the Sunwolves. They hate to travel as well, which is just going to count completely against them. The thing the Blues need to work out is just how to close out a close game. They seem to have let a few slip now that you've got to say a better Blues team or a more experienced Blues team in the past would have definitely picked up the win by. That'll come with them in time, and I think this Blues team could be decent enough very soon, even this season, later on this year. It's something they'll pick up, playing as a unit. All the talk about me needing a better fly half or first 5, I don't really go with that. I think they need more support around their first 5. They need more support around a player like Highlanders. He's not bad, and I can guarantee you, if he played at the Crusaders, he would be touted as one of the best going around New Zealand scene at the moment. There'll be talk about him, like there is with Mo'unga, like there is about Mitchell Hunt at the moment, saying, wow, this kid's come from nowhere and he's amazing. Put West in that red, and I guarantee you'll be saying exactly the same thing. It's the team, it's the core. It's not that individual player. He's not a bad player, and I feel he's getting a pretty unfair rap, as I've talked about before as well, in that Blues team. So the Bulls, I don't have too much to say about this Bulls team. They've been pretty poor this year, as I talked about before. It took a late win to get their first win of the season against the Sunwolves, which, I mean, that tells you a big enough story as it is. The Bulls typically hate to travel, especially coming to New Zealand as well. And the Blues have been playing, New Zealand opponents as well, which means although their results don't show great form, they've been playing the better teams in the competition as well, which means when they play some of these other sides, like, the Sunwolves could be, or the Bulls, some other sides, like the Australian teams, they'll probably find they're actually not a bad team, and you'll probably find yourself saying in a couple of weeks, when they get a few overseas teams playing them, they might not actually look that bad. It's just they've probably been a bit unlucky. Their fixtures list has been pretty harsh, and they just haven't performed at their peak. If they won those games, you'd say they're probably one of the best teams in the competitions, but I think they're there or thereabouts, and they're still a threat to be in those playoff spots, especially with the way the Highlanders season is going in New Zealand here. But the Bulls, that's the team we're talking about here. The Bulls have had a dreadful season so far. I just can't see this being a good tour for them. It's going to take something miraculous, a big change, a big difference for them to come away from New Zealand with some points intact. I can't see it happening, and with that I'm going for the Blues to win this one. I think it might be a bit closer than many might expect, but I'm going for the Blues by 9. That's my pick for the Blues versus the Bulls. Next up, we make our way to Australia, and this one is interesting. This one is really, really interesting. It is the Brumbies versus the Highlanders. Now, wow, this could be a cracker of a game as well. So from what I've seen from the Brumbies this season, I think they are easily the best Australian team going around at the moment. And they're up against a Highlanders team who are absolutely hammered by the hospital ward. But the Brumbies, as I just said, the best out of Australia so far, I think. But you've got to look at their record, and they've only actually beaten other Australian sides, which is a very, very interesting statistic. So you're coming up against a New Zealand team now. Things are a bit different here as well. I think they will trouble the Highlanders because, as we talked about, very much injury depleted, very much picking on players who, wouldn't have expected to even go on the bench in a normal season, but it's Super Rugby. We all know that injuries are a massive part of how this competition goes as well. I think if you're a Brumbies supporter, there's one place you want to look at where your team could actually get it up over the Highlanders. I think will be in the forwards. I think the Brumbies have been pretty good in the forward pack, and that's given what the backline does possess, especially the likes of Henry Spate as well, a little bit more time, a little bit more room, and that's given them a lot more chances and opportunities. I think if that's somewhere that the Brumbies can get a little bit of a foothold, it could make them up for a good contest against the Highlanders. But as we talk about this Highlanders team, absolutely injury smashed, and last weekend, talking of smash, they got smashed by the Hurricanes as well. Morale will probably be a bit low. A lot of players missing that they'll be normally depending on and normally expecting to perform. What they need to do is they need to look at what the good things are coming out of this Highlanders team at the moment. And I think the best thing this Highlanders team have going for them is one of the best players in the world on form, who seems to be showing a little bit more form. And I'm going to put that down to Aaron Smith right now. He looked not too shabby against the Hurricanes last week, and I think if he can pick up some more form, he can make even the worst players look pretty decent in that Highlanders backline. He can give players space and time. He can give his team, all that encouragement. He's passionate, and he just lifts that morale, boosts the team ridiculously well. And on top of the fact, like I mentioned, he's a great player, lightning fast pass, and he just knows how to control a game. Out of form, he's pretty average, isn't he? But in form, like we've seen the glimpses of, he could be pretty much a game changer. My pick for this one I'm basing on pretty much the quality of New Zealand teams and the fact that Australia have yet to put any points on overseas sides. And for that reason, I'm going with the Highlanders to win this one away by 6 points against the Brumbies. Contentious, but that's what you got to do to rise yourself up the table of the predictions ladder. Alright, that is half the weekend done, and now we move into the second half where the Sunwolves are back at home yet again. This time they've got a visit from the Stormers as well. Well, I'm not holding my breath for the poor old Sunwolves here. I think they should be celebrating the Sunwolves. They should be celebrating a couple of really, really good wins in the last few weeks, like we saw against the Bulls. Possibly a game they should have won. If there's ever a time, you've dragged a team into a match, you've managed to get one of their players sent off on a red card, that is when you lift. That is when you rise up, and that is when you play to the best of your ability and, pick out that unlikely victory because the other team's got a yellow or red card, but the Sunwolves, they just couldn't do it. They pushed the Sharks, they pushed the Cheetahs, they pushed the Bulls. 3 teams they probably easily should have won as well. They just can't seem to put that final nail in the coffin. And as a result, again, it's hard to back a team that just can't seem to put that final push on an opposition as the match wears down. As we've talked about before, the Sunwolves continue to show no problem in knowing how to score points. Again, it's their defence that's becoming the problem to the Sunwolves, and they just can't hold it together at the end of the match, which is proving to be their ultimate downfall. The Stormers, on the other hand, their opponents coming off a bye, probably been the pick of the South African team so far as well, but you got to say again, like we talked about the Hurricanes earlier in the season, they haven't hardly been tested against really good opposition, and that could be, you know, with the Stormers' downfall later on, but I don't think it's going to happen here. I think they're going to take out the Sunwolves quite easily as well. I think they'll be still far too good. I think this game will have a lot of points. I think the Stormers will probably throw caution to the wind and go quite attacking as well, which will play into the Sunwolves' hands, but I do think the Stormers are going to be far too strong as well, and we won't find out how good the Stormers really are until later on in the competition. And with that, I'm going to be going off the Stormers by 18. Thought I would have gone a bit more there, but probably being a bit conservative, seeing both teams are going to throw the ball around, score some good tries, score a lot of points, but in the end it'll be quite comfortable for the Stormers to get the win over the Sunwolves, even though it's at home. But are home matches really home matches for the Sunwolves? Topic for another day, I do think about that. So on to our sixth match of the weekend, and we have the Kings up against the Lions, and this is a good opportunity to bring up what I was talking about before with the Kings and the Sharks matchup, where the Kings actually showed a bit of balls there. They actually showed a bit of guts, but the way they did it was the way they controlled the game and the way they drew the Sharks down from their usual high standard. They pulled them down to an error-ridden, dirty down and ground and pound game against the Kings, and it was almost like, you know, two teams playing the way the Kings play, which isn't pretty, isn't good. It's very, very mistake-ridden as well. But the Sharks couldn't seem to break out of that and play to their high standard, and I think we've got to give the Kings some credit there that they actually pulled the Sharks down to their level of game and almost pulled off what would have been upset of the season so far. Like we talked about, poor discipline as well from the Kings. Pretty much cost them the game, I think. Cards throughout it as well. It made it really, really disappointing for the Kings. Typically, you know, they're not going to get that win. And when they had that bit of pressure on to try and get the results, they eventually capitulated all over the floor. Even though the Sharks were giving them every opportunity to take the victory, they just couldn't do it. They just couldn't do it. And thankfully, my predictions of them being rubbish this season are safely still on track. So enough about the Kings. We're going to talk about the Lions. Now, I think the Lions are absolutely ruthless. And recent performances by them have probably given them a bit of a kick up the arse as well about how they need to play. They know how to be the best team in the competition. They've been far below that in passages. Sometimes they're really good, other times they're really bad, and they can't be that inconsistent. The Lions, we know, are not that inconsistent, so they need to go back to that like we saw against the Reds. They were amazing. They turned it on back at home as well, and now you've got to talk about what their form will be like on the road. Going to play the Kings, they're still in South Africa, but can they keep that ruthlessness we've seen from them at home last week up in the road matches as well? It's the Kings. It's a great chance for them to really put it on the table here and dominate one of the worst teams in the competition and show once again that the Lions are a threat. That's what needs to happen, and I'm picking them to do it as well. I've got the Lions by 29 points. They are going to destroy the Kings, and I'm not going to be even willing to say the Kings are going to drag them down again like they did the Sharks. The Sharks, they play pretty close to that style, very defensive, very much, you know, that old school South African style, whereas I think the Lions will tear them to shreds with that attacking play that they like to use. If we see glimpses of what we saw from them last season, this one could get ugly. Alrighty, just a couple of matches left to go. It's the Cheetahs who are hosting the Sharks for our second to last penultimate game of round 5. And the Cheetahs, like we touched a little bit about last weekend as well, injury ridden, but again, what team isn't? Most of the teams are pretty hammered by injuries, and I think what's troubling the Cheetahs at the moment is their team is good, but their depth not quite up to that same standard. As long as they're playing their top players, they're going to be a threat. They're going to be a team that are going to take wins off good sides in this competition if they can keep their team fit. They've struggled to do so far, and they're paying the price now with the struggling to put a full team in favourable positions on the field. We've seen that last week against the Jaguares. They were quite far off the pace. The Jaguares put them to the sword, scored a lot of tries, and the Cheetahs just didn't seem like the Cheetahs that we've seen from them in earlier weeks as well. Second half performance from them was a lot better, but it wasn't up to the standard where they're going to get wins. And the Jaguars, well, they struck them at a good time to pick off a team that probably on another day they wouldn't have been able to beat. Another advantage that's going towards the Cheetahs that they are back at home now against the Sharks, which, you know, it's always that nice little boost to be back at home, back around the environment that you know. Possibility of injury players returning as well. There's a lot of them. Just strengthening that team is what they need to do. Keep building it forward. And against a team like the Sharks, who showed pretty big vulnerabilities last weekend, this Cheetahs team could pull something off here. Again, we've talked about it. They're good enough side, but the depth is what is lacking. Can they, get these guys back, and can they recover the decent start to their season they had? If I pick against them, they'll probably win this one. If I go with them, they'll probably fall apart like last weekend as well. But they're up against the Sharks, who we know already, we've talked about it, pulled off the great escape against the Kings last weekend. But I think they'll demand a performance that will bounce back from that. Sharks know they're a lot better side than how they played last weekend against the Kings. And that will probably be the catalyst for them to come back in a big way in their next game. They need to keep up their own game plan, which is what I talked about a bit before with the Kings. The Sharks just got a bit lost, they got a bit wayward, and they need to remember how they play. Not worry about the opposition, just play their own game, and that's what they need to look to do. Their away form, you've got to say, for the Sharks has been pretty decent as well. Their tour of Australia, although Australia's not the strongest, they looked all right. They scored a few good tries as well. Their defence is always as strong. I think they're a team that's coming up all right as well, the Sharks. And I'm going to pick them to win this one. I'm pretty impressed with how the Sharks have played this season. The injuries to the Cheetahs, who knows who's actually playing this weekend. They haven't named their squad at the time of recording this. But it's just a bad time now for the Cheetahs to try and get something back. Players returning could be the boost they need, but I think the Sharks, even with their best team, would give them a good run. The home advantage could prove to be the ultimate difference, but I'm still going to pick the Sharks to win this one by 11 points. Only a slight margin. Could be a decent game here, depending on which Sharks team turn up in this match. But I don't think the Cheetahs are going to try and play a downward game. I think both sides will play a pretty upbeat, up-tempo sort of match, but ultimately skill will come into it. And the Sharks have shown they are no pushovers in 2017, and again, got them by 11 to win this one. Okay, so on to the final match of the weekend. It's the Jaguares up against the Reds. The Jaguares back in action, and I think they're in the best form of their Super Rugby careers at the moment. 2 wins on the trot, a big performance last weekend to thrash the Cheetahs. I don't care how good, how bad the Cheetahs are, they thrashed the Cheetahs. And of course they beat the Lions as well, no mean feat. So you got to say the Jaguars are definitely on top of form right now. 3 in a row, a huge possibility. And of course at home it has to happen, because that is a massive advantage to get these games that they need to win like this at home as well, against a team like the Reds. I mean, God, have the Reds been abysmal? And of course they're missing Quade Cooper. He's out for 3 weeks with a red card suspension. I've just lost all faith. I have completely lost all hope that the Reds can be anything good this season. I thought they were going to be the turnaround team of the Australian Conference and lift the Australian sides and the Australian Conference up another notch or two, but boy oh boy have I been wrong about that. Superstar names, superstar players, I'd mention superstar paychecks as well, but there's anything but superstar performances coming out of most of these older guys as well that have come back. I'll probably only say Higginbotham is the only one who's really, I think, stood up a bit. Carmichael Hunt has been in the press a lot lately about how he involves himself in this matchup with the mic thing we've seen. He's still not been that good, has he, really, since he played rugby again? He's been the ultimate disappointment for Australian rugby, I think, as far as league convert goes. Just discipline is bad. Season's going bad for them as well, and I can just see it's going to just pile on top of them, top of piles on top of piles, and just get worse and worse and worse for the Reds. They're on tour, away to Argentina. Again, a bad place to play for the visiting side, a difficult and tough place to play. If the Jaguars get on top of this one early, if they just get a lead, get their crowd going, get their crowd involved, score some tries, the Reds could be dead and buried after 20 minutes of this matchup. It looks like it's going to be bad for the Reds. I'm just saying bad, bad, bad. Red, red, red. Warning, warning, warning from the Reds. It's just not going to be good for them, and I think this tour could be just bad repercussions for the Reds as well. As far as the high hopes I had, you can find them out in the wheelie bin. They've been completely squashed, completely destroyed. I'm going Jaguars, 3 on the trot. Big win for the Jags, up 16 points over the Reds to wrap up round 5. That is it! We are done and dusted for round 5 of Super Rugby. Hope you've enjoyed this little preview of last week and this week as well. Come to you a bit later than usual. A few issues coming in with the rendering and editing as well. But that's alright, we're getting in. And before the weekend, a look ahead at the action. As always, I'll see you all on Twitter and other social platforms over the weekend of action. You can join me on there at Cornflakes Crib. Do not forget to follow me on there and have your say in the comments below and on Twitter and anywhere else you can find me as well. So thank you all for tuning and watching. Hope you're all enjoying. Don't forget to get your picks in as well for the predictions and fantasy teams this weekend, or join up if you haven't already. Links down below. Get involved in that, and I'll see you all there and on the weekend's action. Until then, thank you all for watching, and as always, take care.